This is the Authority Company Podcast, conversations with leaders who are building the future. I'm Joe Pardavila. Today I'm joined by Brendan P. Keegan, an award-winning president and CEO, investor, board member, and author of the new book, Unbalanced on Purpose. Move beyond the myth of perfect balance and live with intention. After raising more than $10 billion in capital, leading over 250,000 people, and helping drive major growth at companies like Merchants Fleet, Brendan brings a real-world framework for moving past the myth of perfect balance and living with more clarity, energy, and intention. Brendan Keegan, welcome to the show. How are you, my friend?
Good. Excited to be here with you today, Joe.
It's been a long time. I've known you for years, Brendan, and you know what's funny? I've never seen you as the contrarian type. You've always had leadership roles. These days you're on a bunch of boards, but you've taken the contrarian side here, which kind of surprised me when I first saw, obviously the name of the book is Unbalanced on Purpose. And for years, as you know, especially since the pandemic, work-life balance or life-work balance, they always have the play on words. But you come out firing with unbalanced on purpose. When did you come to this realization that a little unbalance is okay?
Well, here's how I look at it is your balance and my balance, they're different. They're different. Like nobody's balance is the same because your balance goes off of what your goals are. So if you have goals of, hey, I'm 25, I want to retire at 50, well, then you better be working some good hours. If your goal is, hey, I want to have great work-life balance. I want to have summers off. I want to travel. I want to get married, have kids, and, work doesn't mean as much to me, then you don't have to put those same hours in. But, you may not be retiring at 50. So it's my goals drive what my balance is. And by the way, balance is one thing at 23, another thing at 33, another thing at 43. You get married, that changes your balance. You have kids, that changes your balance. By the way, your kids are now out of college, that changes your balance. So I kind of talk about, unbalanced on purpose. There's a lot of people who would say, oh, you are unbalanced, but for them, they're perfectly balanced based on their goals.
Right. And so with your life, what does that look like? What does unconscious imbalance mean to you? Like the idea of just living in this unbalanced state without almost being intentional about it? Because I think, remember, Brendan, there was that whole thing about being intentional with your time, using it wisely. So tell me about this idea of unconscious imbalance.
Yeah, so I'm just going to give you just a super straightforward example, myself. So if I roll the clock back, to I'm 25, I'm 26, just getting married. I remember actually working on Thanksgiving, and I remember just went in the morning, worked a little bit, came home, and I was with my fiance, and we were at the in-laws, and that was great. Fast forward to now with the family. Like I'm taking Wednesday off, Thursday off, Friday off, not working. So having a family, changed what my work hours are. And taking that a step further, I made a decision early in my kids' life, not when they were born. It probably took me to wise up till they were 4 or 5. About the time they really started having events, like school plays were the first events, school graduations, kindergarten. Then they started playing sports. I just made a decision. I'm not going to miss anything, period. So that changed how what hours I worked. Now I still worked a lot of hours, but for instance, when they were in high school, they had games every Wednesday afternoon, and everybody at my company knew, do not look for Brendan in the office Wednesday at 2. And by the way, he's probably not going to respond to you 2 to 6 on Wednesday, but he'll be back online at 7. That's just a choice. So, you can be unbalanced and then that change. And again, I think what drives that change is what are your goals? So my goals at 25, the amount of time I was investing in family at 25 was very little. Family was a fiance, family were parents that, we didn't see each other every day. At 45, family was 2 young kids that I coached in sports, and I wanted to be around as much as possible. So just the amount of time I put into family at 25 versus 45, dramatically different. But that was me based on, I wanted to be around my kids.
That's great. And it's a great example about the 2 to 6 thing, because one thing that you mentioned there, you said it really quickly, was you can't get him 2 to 6, but you know what? At 7, he'll send you a no. Where some people would be like, my work-life balance is 2 to 6. I'm taking off for this work for a personal engagement. But then after that, it's after 6 o'clock, so I'm not gonna deal with work. So there is that idea of I mean, you used the perfect word of like unconscious imbalance because even though you've checked out for 4 hours, at 7 o'clock, your team and your employees, they're going to be getting an email from you if you sent them an email, which I think is incredibly important for people to bring out because Brennan, you and I have talked about this in the past, like the idea of like when people go on vacation and then they spend the first 2 days back going through emails. Like you and I can't relate to that. But the idea of like not even looking at your email, like, first of all, I respect people's ability to do that. I can't do that. But this idea of like imbalance, balance is like, okay, cool. During the day, I'm going to take time away from my family. But I guess at 7 o'clock, where most people will probably be winding down, I'm going to start up again. That's super important to point out.
But what drove me logging back on at 7 was that I had a goal of being a CEO. So as the CEO, the decision I made to be CEO, I made the decision that at 7 I had to log back on. Now, if I had said, I don't want to be a CEO, I would like to remain an individual contributor, then I could have left the office at 2 and logged in the next morning at 8 a.m.
Right.
My goals said, if you want to be CEO, you can still do this for your kids. So that's great. But you then are going to work 7 to 11 at night. You're going to take 4 hours out in the afternoon, but you're going to put 4 hours in at night. So my kids, it's so interesting now to hear them talk about that they didn't see the work behind the scenes that they see now. And I asked my daughter, what do you mean? She goes, I didn't know when we would go on vacation. I'm going to take your example, that you were up at 4, you did your workout, and then you worked in, 3 hours before we got up. And then when we went to bed at 9 o'clock when they were little, then I worked till, 11 or 11:30. She said, we just saw that you were at the amusement park with us. We saw that you were on the beach with us. You saw that you were on tour with us. And I said, right, but that's because I wanted to be present for you, but I still had at that point a CEO role that demanded certain hours. But I also would tell people when I would go on vacation, and this is really important, guys, here's when you will hear from me. Eastern Standard Time, you will hear from 4 to 7, 4 to 8 in the morning, and you will hear from 8 to midnight. But from, 6 in the morning till whatever, 6, 7, 8 at night, I'm generally going to be offline. And, I'd say, hey, if something's an emergency, text me 911. If it's almost an emergency, 811. And by the way, if you're just trying to get me information, it's 411. And that was our code. And I can tell you a funny story. We were on our way to go diving with or snorkeling with whale sharks. And we're in a van. There's 12 of us in the van. We're in Mexico, and I got a 911. And the entire van found the call absolutely fascinating. And I will tell you, because it was a 911, I dropped a few inappropriate F-bombs with kids in the van. But my point was 911, that meant doesn't matter. Now we were in the van. It's like, you're calling me back right away.
Wow, that's good stuff. And I wonder, because I know a lot of the content in your books are geared towards leaders, but how about this idea of leading by example? Like they see the big boss with the hot sauce working like this. Did you expect or hope that this sort of commitment would rub off on your people? Or is it one of those things where you were like, hey, I'm Brendan Keegan. I'm cut from a different cloth. I'm not going to expect that. How did you handle it? Because I think some leaders do that where it's lead by example, but you better follow what I'm leading with.
No, see, like my expectations are in line with what role you've chosen in the company. So if you're my CFO, then my expectations are very similar to myself because you have taken the CFO role. If you are an office clerk, an office administrator, if you're a receptionist, I have no expectations that you're going to do any work before 8:30 or 9. And I have zero expectations that you're going to do anything after 5. None. Matter of fact, I would find it odd if a receptionist was working at 7 at night. I'd be like, what are you doing? So
Something illegal's happening in the office there,
yeah,
Brendan.
like, you stealing Post-its? So I look at it as the role defines the level of work you need to put in. Now in the book, I actually used this example of these two twins. One has chosen to go into investment banking, and at 23 years old is getting to the office at 8 and getting home at midnight. And one has chosen to be a school teacher, getting to work at 8, leaving at 3, having weekends off, teachers' days off, having the summers off. And both of them are balanced based on their goals. And I use them throughout all 9 chapters to explain that based on the season of their life, like the 23-year-old that's in investment banking is like, hey, right now I'm putting a tremendous amount of time to building my career foundation, and I'm going to push off marriage. I'm going to push off kids. So a little bit later, the school teacher's like, hey, I actually have a boyfriend and I'd like to get married sooner rather than later. I'd like to have kids. I'd like to settle down. So they're both actually accomplishing their goals, and they're both balanced based on what they are trying to achieve. And that's one thing I talk a lot about just in general when I'm mentoring people. Don't let somebody else put their expectations or their intentions on you because you have different goals.
Nah, it's great stuff, Brendan. And one of the things that another thing we've talked about in the past, and something we're passionate about, is the busyness epidemic. This idea that, especially that this is definitely a Western culture thing. How we wear busyness with as almost like a badge of honor, like it's our cape, and it's become such a strong cape that when that word is dropped in a conversation, it's like a mic drop. It's almost like saying my cat died is the same level as I'm busy. People will respond to the cat dying like, "Oh," to the busy. "Oh my god, I can only imagine how busy you are." What's going on? Like,
Okay,
how
so
do we
first of
solve for
all,
this?
I hit on this in the first chapter. I hit on it, I think, in the first couple of lines. I call it the delusion of busyness. Okay, everybody thinks they're busy. The reality is most people aren't. So for instance, I'll have somebody say, "Hey, Brennan, I'd love to get 30 minutes of your time, and I know you're busy." And they're stunned when I go, "Actually, I'm not busy. Do you want to meet today, tomorrow, the next day?" You know, and here's the thing, busyness has become a status symbol. Like
Yeah.
if I say, "Nope, I'm not busy," is it I'm not important, I don't have a good job, like, I'm not spending time with my family, like, no one says, "Hey, how you doing?" "Good, good." "Busy?" "No." Like, you just don't hear that. Now, what I do enjoy, and I've always considered myself like a little bit of a leadership scientist without the, cape and the PhD,
Sure.
is, I'll have some of my good friends say, "I'm so busy," and I actually know what they're doing. And I'm like, "You're not busy. You're really not. You have a 9 to 5 job. You're like the receptionist or the administrator. Your kids are out of college. You don't have a lot of hobbies. Like you're not busy." But we are conditioned to say that. And it's interesting. The more we say that, the more we actually convince ourselves. But like when people say I'm busy, they don't say it just to as a status symbol. They actually believe it. They could pass a polygraph. But like
Yeah.
is scrolling Instagram or Facebook or reading Reddit for an hour a day busy? No. And we could go back to 1900 and say, ready for this? People in 1900 were busier than we are today. And you might say, no way, they didn't work as much as we do. And I'd say, well, they did because their household chores, just to live, took longer. They didn't have Instacart for their food. They didn't have DoorDash to have delivered. They didn't have, a yard service to come do their yard. They did their yard. They made their milk. They made their butter. They cleaned their own house. They did their own laundry. They didn't have dry cleaning. So if you took all the hours of things that we outsource to other people and say, hey, wait, we have to do that, you could argue that someone in 1900 had more to do and they were busier than we are today. Now, what have we filled that time with? We filled it with social media. We filled it with television. We filled it with radio. We've filled it with going on trips and driving. 1900, they weren't saying, hey, do you want to go to Europe for a week's vacation?
Right.
They were saying, hey, are we going to, take a couple of days off and go by horse and buggy and go visit somebody, 3, 4 hours away. So I talk about the delusion of busyness. and it kind of sets the book up a little bit.
Now I love that, and it's funny, I one of my favorite, like, on the street interviews ever was, Jerry Seinfeld, and you know Jerry's very sarcastic and sardonic, and, the person, just did, holding up a camera, say, "Hey, Jerry, how do you have time to do all these things?" Because he was like, I think he had published a book, he was producing a TV show, what have you, and in typical Jerry Seinfeld fashion said, I have the same amount of time you do. I'm not more busy or you're busy. I have the same, 12 to 10 working hours of the day and I get things done during the time. And so I think, Brendan, it's not even like almost like a busyness issue. It's like a prioritization issue. Like people just do not prioritize things because I'll use the example of like I'll say to someone, "Hey, do you have 3 hours tomorrow to do this one thing?" And like, "Oh no, 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 so busy." I'm like, "Oh man, because Joe Rogan would love to have you on his podcast and it takes 3 hours. Would you do?" Oh, no, no, I would do that. I would sit down for Joe Rogan 3 hours, but I just don't have any other 3 hours of the day. So I think it's more of just prioritizing what's important. And like you said, stop wasting time scrolling, doing stuff on social media, watching, an 8 hour sit down binge of Netflix. It's a prioritization problem that I think a lot of leaders and I think even non-leaders grapple with today.
Well, I think everyone grapples with it. So as I go through my book, I call balance I call the six circles of connection, and I kind of order them where the first circle is yourself, is your
Yep.
self circle. And what I have found is the more time you put into yourself, the more energy you have for others. And so the first circle is self. The second circle is family. And I gave the example, my amount of time I put into my family at 25 versus 45, very different. At 25, it was 5 or 10%. Visited my parents at Thanksgiving, visited them at Christmas. I lived far away, would come home in March or April, visit them over the summer. So, 4 or 5 family visits a year, family box was checked. Now I'd have 4 or 5 games in a given week, when my kids were younger. The third one is friends. And friends, here's what I find. I find when you're 25, you put 10, 15, 20% of time into friends. That's who you go out with on Friday night. That's who you go out with on Saturday night. Okay, all of a sudden when you're married and you have kids and they're in high school, at least for me, I abandoned a lot of my friends, not
Sure.
intentionally, but it was like I put time into work and then boom, family took up 25, 30% of my time. And so if somebody said, "Hey, Brennan, when do you want to get together in golf?" And I'd be like, "How's September look?" And they're like, "Well, that's 3 months away." I'm like, "I'm sorry, I got travel across all June, July, and August, man. I'm tapped out." So that's what I call the third circle. The fourth circle is faith. Putting time into your faith so you remain balanced. And again, that takes different times throughout your life. Number 5 and 6 is community. Like volunteering, being a member of your community. For me, I put a lot of hours into coaching. I viewed that's how I could give back. And then the sixth is professional. Now someone might say, "Well, geez, why is it professional sixth? Why isn't it first?" Well, if we put it first, we would just fill that up. It's almost like a default for a lot of people.
Sure.
And so I kind of go through those and say, you go through seasons where, professional at one point, that 23-year-old investment banker, professional is 80, 90%. And then, but all of a sudden that investment banker, when they're 43, 45, their professional might be 30, 40% in because they've pulled it back. So when you look at those, but here's the thing I talk about, be conscious about it. I'll give a good example and I'll give a bad example. A good example is, a number of years ago, actually 4 years ago, I was going through a sale process, selling the company. And I remember sitting my family down and saying, "Okay, guys, not going to have you sign NDAs, but very confidential. We're going to be selling the company." "Well, Dad, that's great. Why are you telling us?" "Well, for the next 6 months, I'm not going to have as much time as I normally have for stuff. And there's going to be times where I'm going to be a jerk and maybe a little impatient just because there's a little bit more pressure on me at work." So for 6 months, they would kind of be like, they would give me a little bit more rope. I would hopefully, I still made their events, but it might be, not as optimal. But here's the deal. Soon as we sold and the deal was over, I recognized that I sacrificed friend time and family time. And then as soon as we sold, I was reinvesting into those circles. And I remember I took 12 of my friends on the New England Patriots jet out to a game against the Raiders. And I remember saying when we got there, I said, "Hey guys, this is a gift from me. I'm sorry for being a really crappy friend the last year. I just haven't had time for any of you." Now I did get a kick out of them. One of them said, "Hey, if this is the reward, be a crappy friend to us next year too." But that was me consciously saying my answer was no to my friends for a year. But I didn't want that to become who I was. I just wanted to check back in. So that's a good example. I'm going to give you a bad example. Early in my career, we were doing a startup. I was out in Silicon Valley. I was working 18 hours a day. And, I had always worked out every day like this morning, I worked out. It's been important. But my self circle suffered and I stopped working out. And in like 6 months, I put on like 20 pounds because I was working, I was eating like crap. They were having dinner brought in every night. It was a race. The internet boom was taking off. So it was just a race. And I remember an employee saying to me, his name was Dan, saying, "Hey, Brendan, when you got here, you used to work out all the time. You were in great shape. And now look at you." I go, "Yeah, I just don't have time." He goes, "Hey, Larry Ellison's running Oracle and he has time. You have time. You just aren't making it a priority."
Mm.
And, I thank Dan for saying that. One, for having the guts to come up to your boss and say, "You're looking a little fat there, buddy." But then when I sat there and said, "Wait, here's a CEO of one of the world's biggest companies and he's got time. How do I not have time?" And what I did realize by putting more time into my self circle and my physical fitness and then mental fitness, it actually made my work more productive.
That's great. And it's great to hear that you did not have your family sign an NDA. That would have been really weird, Brendan. So good on you. Good job there. Let's talk about this because everything we've talked about, right? You're pointing folks in the right direction from the lessons that you've learned about, your time and space, whether you're 25 or 45. We talked about this busyness epidemic. We talked about, being able to manage your time with your family and friends. If an author reads this, Brendan, because the one thing about entrepreneurs and leaders, it's like that survival mechanism. They're like, hey, if I do all this that Brendan says, I got all my circles, I start doing all this, and I start to pull back from my professional circle one, does that make me softer? Am I going to lose my edge? Am I going to lose everything? What do you say to someone who's afraid of taking these steps? And not that you expect people to do this overnight, flipping in almost like a regarding Henry thing with a new person the next day. But there is some trepidation for people to be like, man, the idea of pulling back from work seems very dangerous to me.
Yeah, well, here's what I'll tell you. If I mentor a number of people, and I'm mentoring um, some of the next generation now that happen to be in finance. And I'll tell them, set a goal that you're going to leave the office at 8, and then you're going to go home and do the extra hours. And here's what you'll do: if you say you're going to leave at 8, then when the day starts winding down at 5, and you go, "I've got 3 more hours," you'll crank 3 hours of work. If you say, "I don't know when I'm going to leave, probably 10 or 11," that 3 hours of work can easily bleed into 4 hours, can bleed into 4.5 hours. The dinner break can become an hour, not 30 minutes. The chit chat with somebody can become 30 minutes, not 15. So, what I find is that when you become more disciplined with your time, you actually become extremely efficient at using that time. So if you say, "That's it, I want to work on my fitness, but I'm tired at the end of the day. I can't do it during the day. I'm going to get up 30 minutes earlier." Then if you do that, then you're manufacturing 30 more minutes. The other thing is, over time, you will start to build systems. Systems being, this is my morning routine, and my morning routine is going to set my day up. For instance, this is a really simple one that I teach a lot of young leaders. Really do a good job on your action list for the day. Don't list 30 things and get 5 done, but be really diligent about that. So all of a sudden, a meeting gets out 15 minutes early, and you go, "Oh, I got 15 minutes." You look at your action list, and it already tells you this is what you should do. I know a lot of young people, for that matter, middle of their career people, have 15 minutes, and they almost spend 15 minutes on, "Well, what should I do?" As opposed to, "Oh, I'm supposed to review the press release. Okay, let me just go do that. Let me get that done right now." And so if you really prioritize, you will become more disciplined. If you become more disciplined, you'll become more efficient. And in essence, you will have more time, going back to Jerry Seinfeld, you will have more time than the next person. And I'm very confident that if you could dissect Jerry's day, he had the same time as whoever asked him that question. But I'd be willing to bet he was much more disciplined in how he used his days, how he used the minutes and the hours in the day.
Absolutely, no question. And it's so funny you talk about the word discipline because I think if a say an underling or an employee went to a boss, they would say, the idiom, work smarter, not harder. But what I find funny is, and you being a big sports fan, this when it comes to the top, it never seems like they're working smarter. They're just working harder. Like, you're in New England there. I know, big fan of the Patriots. Bill Belichick was known to be at the facility at like 5 o'clock in the morning, and he would be there till like 1 a.m. the next day. And it's like, there's got to be a better way. I'm a Jets fan, as you know, Brendan, and famously, one of my coaches, Adam Gase, left his wife while she was giving birth to a child, so he could do the game plan for like the next game against the Bengals, and they ended up getting blown out. So this idea of bosses telling their employees work smarter, not harder, but they don't always sort of prescribe to that. What do you say to folks? Because you mentioned like the idea of like when you said, oh, an investment banker's going to be in the office from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. What the hell are they doing, Brendan? Like, why does it take 12 hours to accomplish what most people are accomplishing in less time than that? So tell me about this idea of leaders working smarter, not harder.
Well, and I am a Patriots fan, and I'm, probably top 10 in the Bill Belichick fan club. But what I would tell you is that cost him his marriage, those hours. Somebody that doesn't ever strike that balance, it's a real like red warning sign that, hey, your partner might not, be signed up for that for the long term. I would also be interested in looking and dissecting, their friend circle and their family circle outside of, like their friends and the coaches. Now, one trick Belichick had is he hired his sons as coaches, so he got to
Right.
spend lots of time with them. But
He had to wait till they were like 20 years old, but
yeah.
sure, he missed out
But
on the first 2 decades of their life.
how many of their football games was he going to? And
Right.
I think that's a fair question. So there are some people that they feel to get to the top, they can't be balanced. But I would also say that person probably has an extreme goal. They want to be the winningest football coach in NFL history. I'm sure there are coaches that, are happily married and see their kids more, and then just have better balance. And then there's certain professions where when you're in that profession, you're signing up to certain things. Like if you're an accountant, your kid's asking, "Hey, can we go on spring break in March or April?" It's probably a no,
Right.
right? With tax being due April 15th. If you say, "Hey, can we go away May or June?" The answer is probably absolutely. I can't wait to go away in May. So, there's different seasonality in different professions and in different jobs. So I think the key is it all goes back to what are your personal goals? And your goals are your goals. My goals are my goals. And there's this other concept that I talk about where as people, we're very judgy about other people. Very, very judgy. And there's a term, and I think I came up with this term. I don't know. I haven't filed it with the Patent and Trademark Office, but it's grind shaming. And I've seen it. It's like I've got a friend who was a very successful college lacrosse player, professional lacrosse player, and in high school, people would say, "Bro, why are you working so hard?" And it'd be like, "Well, my goal is to be like a great college lacrosse player, not a good college lacrosse player, a great But people made him feel bad because he would get up before school and shoot. And I call that grind shaming. And somebody's like, my daughter, by the way, happens to be in investment banking. And I see some of her friends, man, I don't get it. Why do you work so many hours? And they almost make her feel guilty for it. And I call that grind shaming. And it's just an example of grind shaming. Or somebody says to the teacher, oh, it must be nice having the whole summer off and being able to go to the beach. Well, you're kind of showing a little bit of disrespect to that person. Again, you choose different professions, you choose different things. Take COVID. COVID created a whole new hybrid slash remote workforce. And I think COVID kind of turned up the, what is work life balance. And, some people redefined how they look at it. I would say don't redefine it because you want to work remote. Redefine it if your goals allow you to work remote. And so again, to me, it's just as simple as what are your goals? If those are your goals and you really want to hit those goals, now go look at the six circles of connection, look at the season of life that you're in, and make decisions. So if you said, I want to retire at 55 and you're now 45 and you got four kids and you say, that's it, I got to put 90% of my time into professional to retire. I'd say, okay, are you willing to do that? And not so your kids take off for their prom, not
Hmm.
do the driving hours with your kids, not see their high school football or basketball or softball game. No, I want to go to all that. Then I'd be like, hey, you're lying to yourself. You can't put 90% into professional. So retiring early, you probably isn't going to happen. You're going to probably work, normal into your early 60s, but put more time into your family. Another person might say, I'm family's not important to me. I'm going to put 90%. And I'd say, you know what? Those aren't my goals. Those are your goals. But if you acknowledge that's not important, that's perfectly fine. Then that works for you.
Awesome. And what works for you now, Brendan, is I know you've been through a very long, successful career of starting businesses, running businesses. Now you are not running a business.
Yeah.
What is Brendan Keegan's default setting now in this world? Because you talked about the way you used to run companies and you'd go on vacation, wake up in the middle of the night and do some work and all the work-life imbalance that you had. What's life now for Brendan Keegan that you're not running a company?
Well, so my morning routine is the same. And so, I still get up every day at 4:30 and do my morning routine. Now, that's because I'm just conditioned to do that. But I'll also tell you, I have a 13 and 10-year-old dog. They're pugs, and they're conditioned to get up and be fed at 4:30 every morning. So if I decided tomorrow I'm sleeping until 6 because, hey, I'm retired and I can, my dogs would say, time out. We're hungry. It's 4:30. So, I still got my 4:30, 4:30 to 8 is pretty programmed. What I spend my time doing now is I do a lot more writing, I do a lot more speaking, and I do a lot more giving back to the community. Like for instance, as soon as we're done recording this podcast, I've got a 30-minute mentee meeting with a college student who I haven't met before. They reached out to me on LinkedIn and they're asking for some advice. Now, when early in my career, I volunteered many hours. As my career took off, my volunteering went down, but community was still important to me. And honestly, the dollars I gave went up. So my ability to impact the community when I was 22 was I'm going to volunteer a lot and I'm going to give very little. When I was 45, it was I'm going to volunteer less and I'm going to give more. And now I'm able to kind of do both. I'm able to give a lot more time. So I'm able to mentor a lot more people, be available for a lot more people, do a lot more speaking engagements, going out and talking on leadership and helping companies. I just did a keynote for a large multinational bank. And I said, hey, for my fee, here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to make a donation to our foundation, not, because that allows me to put more money into the community. So now what takes up my time is my purpose in life is building 1 million fearless leaders is what's every activity I can do to do that. So for instance, I try to do a podcast every month and I try to do that podcast on leadership every month so that people listen to it. And maybe every podcast impacts 1, 2, 3, 4 people and they hear something in that podcast that gives them fuel to hit their goals. So I'm just really focused at this point in my life at giving back to others, building 1 million fearless leaders, being a better friend, because that's one part of my life that I give myself a solid B- at, and continuing to be, a good family member.
And you can read all about it in Unbalanced on Purpose, Move Beyond the Myth of Perfect Balance and Live with Intention. He is Brendan B. Keegan. Brendan, always great to see you. God bless and good luck.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Thank you so much.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find out more information about Brendan and our other amazing authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.